The year was 2287 and humanity had finally done it. They had broken free from the chains of their solar system and reached out into the stars. Faster-than-light travel was no longer a dream found only in old science fiction books. It was real and humans were using it to explore the galaxy. They had built colonies on planets circling distant stars, settlements that grew and thrived within 50 light-years of Earth. These were exciting times for the human race, but humanity was not alone in the universe. Far from it. The galaxy was filled with other intelligent species, and they had been traveling between the stars for thousands of years before humans even invented the wheel. These alien civilizations had formed a massive organization called the Galactic Consortium, a group that included 47 different species. They had rules, laws, and military forces. They controlled vast stretches of space, and they believed they owned the right to decide who could settle where. The consortium was led by a powerful and aggressive species called the Vorthak. The Vorthak were tall beings with thick armor-like skin and 4 arms. They had built the largest fleet in the galaxy, and they used their military strength to keep the other species in line. When the Vorthak spoke, everyone else listened. They did not like surprises, and humanity was definitely a surprise. First contact happened at a space station called Epsilon 7, a neutral meeting place floating in the dark between star systems. Human diplomats arrived in their ships, nervous but hopeful. They wanted to make friends, to join the galactic community as equals. They brought gifts and offered to share their technology and culture. The consortium representatives looked at the humans with cold eyes. They examined the human ships with sensors and scanners, studying every detail. What they saw made them feel superior and dismissive. Human weapons seemed simple to them. Railguns that fired chunks of metal at high speed, missiles with explosive warheads, plasma torpedoes that burned hot but were easy to defend against. The consortium had faced weapons like these thousands of years ago. In the private chambers of their ships, the Vorthak military analysts wrote their reports. They called human technology crude and outdated. They laughed at the chemical rockets humans still used on some of their smaller vessels. One Vorthak general said that fighting humans would be like fighting children with wooden sticks. The humans were newcomers, primitives who had just learned to walk among the stars. They were no threat. The diplomatic meetings did not go well. The consortium demanded that humans give up their colonies in the Outer Arm territories. These were regions of space rich with minerals and rare elements that the consortium wanted for themselves. They told the humans to pack up and leave, to accept a small corner of space where they would be allowed to exist under consortium rules. The human diplomats were shocked. They had worked so hard to build those colonies. Families lived there. Children had been born on those worlds. The humans asked for time to discuss the demand with their government back on Earth. The consortium gave them 1 week. Back on Earth, in the headquarters of the Unified Defense Council, military and political leaders gathered in emergency sessions. The room was tense. Everyone knew what was at stake. Should they give up the colonies and accept whatever scraps the consortium offered, or should they stand their ground and fight for what they had built? General Martinez stood at the front of the room, his face grim. He was the head of human military forces, a man who had spent his entire life preparing for threats. But he had always imagined fighting other humans, not aliens with technology thousands of years more advanced. He looked around at the faces in the room and saw fear mixed with determination. The debate went on for hours. Some leaders argued for peace at any cost. Others said that surrendering now would make humans slaves forever. Finally, President Okafor spoke. She was a tall woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many difficult decisions. She said that humanity had not come this far just to bow down to bullies. They would not give up the colonies. They would stand and fight if necessary, but there was something else, something that only a few people in that room knew about. In the deepest levels of military headquarters, behind doors that required 6 different security clearances to open, were sealed vaults. These vaults contained weapons that humanity had built long ago, during the darkest times of their history. Weapons so terrible that they had been locked away and forbidden from use. General Martinez knew about these weapons. He had seen the files, read the reports. He knew that humanity had the power to do things that would horrify the consortium. But he also knew that using such weapons would change humanity forever. For now, those vaults would remain sealed. The conventional military would handle this situation. The consortium would never need to know what else humans were capable of. The week passed quickly. The human diplomats returned to Epsilon 7 with their answer. No, they would not surrender the colonies. The consortium representative seemed more amused than angry. The Vorthak commander present at the meeting actually smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. He said that humanity had made a foolish choice and they would learn to regret it. 3 days later, the war began. The Vorthak fleet assembled at the edge of human space. There were hundreds of ships, from small fighters to massive battle cruisers that stretched for kilometers. They moved in perfect formation, a show of power meant to terrify anyone who saw it. The Vorthak were confident. They expected this to be a short war, maybe a few weeks at most. The human colonies detected the fleet on their long-range sensors. Alarms blared across 3 different star systems. Families rushed to evacuation ships. Defense stations powered up their weapons. Human military vessels took up positions ready to defend their homes. The men and women on those ships were afraid, but they were also determined. This was their space, their colonies, their future. They would not give it up without a fight. In the command center of the UDSF Indomitable, Admiral Chen watched the tactical displays. She was a small woman with short black hair and calm eyes that never showed panic. She had been in the military for 30 years, and she had prepared for this moment. But preparation and reality were different things. She looked at the number of enemy ships on her screen and felt a cold weight in her stomach. Admiral Chen gave her orders in a steady voice. The human fleet would engage the enemy according to standard military protocols. They would use their railguns and missiles. They would fight smart and use every advantage of terrain and tactics. But there were protocols that would not be activated. Weapon systems that would remain offline. The Admiral had her orders from the Defense Council. Fight with conventional weapons only. Keep the true capabilities hidden. Wait. The Vorthak fleet reached the first human colony, a small world called New Hope. The attack was brutal and efficient. Vorthak warships fired energy beams that cut through the orbital defense platforms. Human ships fought back, their railguns punching holes in enemy hulls, their missiles finding targets. But for every Vorthak ship that fell, 3 more took its place. The humans were outnumbered. The battle lasted 14 hours. In the end, the human defenders retreated. They had inflicted casualties on the enemy, more than the Vorthak had expected, but it was not enough. New Hope was evacuated, its people fleeing in transport ships while the military held the line. The Vorthak took the planet and celebrated their first victory. Commander Zekrath, the leader of the Vorthak fleet, watched the battle from his flagship. He was pleased with the result, though somewhat surprised by human resistance. These primitives fought better than he had expected. They used clever tactics, hit-and-run attacks, and fought with courage. But courage meant nothing against superior numbers and technology. The humans would fall, it was just a matter of time. Zekrath sent his report back to the Consortium Council. He wrote that humans fought with honor but limited technology. Their weapons were competent but not advanced. He estimated that the Consortium would control all human territory within 3 weeks, maybe 4 at the most. The Council read his report and approved continued military action. They increased the size of the fleet being sent to human space. This would be over soon. Back on Earth, President Okafor sat in her office late at night, reading casualty reports from New Hope. Good people had died defending that colony. More would die in the battles to come. She looked at a photograph on her desk, a picture of her grandson playing in a park. He was only 5 years old. What kind of galaxy would he grow up in? One where humanity was free, or one where they lived under alien rule? She picked up a secure phone and called General Martinez. When he answered, she asked him a simple question. How long could they keep fighting with conventional weapons? The general paused before answering. He said maybe a few months if they were lucky. The consortium had too many ships, too many resources. Eventually, the human fleet would be worn down. President Okafor thanked him and hung up. She sat in the darkness of her office, thinking about those sealed vaults, about the weapons that humanity had promised itself never to use again. The time was not yet right, but it was coming. She could feel it. In space, the war continued. The Vorthak fleet pushed deeper into human territory. More battles were fought. The war spread across human space like wildfire. After the fall of New Hope, the Vorthak fleet split into 3 main groups. Each group targeted a different human colony. The strategy was simple and brutal. Attack everywhere at once, spread the human defenders thin and crush them piece by piece. Commander Zekrath was executing a textbook military campaign. the kind that had worked for the Vorthak 1,000 times before against other species. At the colony of Redstone, human forces tried a different approach. Instead of meeting the Vorthak in open battle, they set traps. They hid mines in asteroid fields and used the terrain to their advantage. When the alien ships came close, the humans struck fast and disappeared. It was guerrilla warfare in space, and it frustrated the Vorthak commanders. They had expected the humans to stand and fight like honorable warriors, not hide and ambush like cowards. But the traps and tactics only delayed the inevitable. The Vorthak had too many ships, too many resources. They cleared the mines and pushed forward. The human defenders at Redstone fought for 6 days before they had to evacuate. Another colony lost, another retreat. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone watching. Humanity was fighting well, but they were losing ground. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, studying the tactical reports with a frown. Her fleet had won some small victories here and there. They had destroyed enemy ships, disrupted supply lines, and made the Vorthak pay for every meter of space they took. But it was not enough. Every day brought more consortium ships into the fight. Every day the human fleet shrank a little more. What bothered the Admiral most was the restraint she had to show. She knew about the sealed weapons, the forbidden technologies. She had been briefed on what humanity was really capable of. Every time she gave an order to retreat, every time she watched good people die, she thought about those weapons. She could end this war in a day if she had authorization to use them, but the orders from Earth were clear. Fight with conventional weapons only. Keep the secrets hidden. Wait for the right moment. On the Vorthak flagship, Commander Zekrath was in a good mood. He walked through the corridors of his ship with confidence, acknowledging the salutes of his crew. The campaign was going exactly as planned. Maybe even better than planned. The humans were putting up more of a fight than expected, true, but that just made the victory more satisfying. Zekrath respected enemies who fought well before they fell. He entered the intelligence analysis room where his staff worked on understanding the human military. Large screens showed diagrams of human ships, breakdowns of their weapons, and tactical assessments. A Vorthak officer approached and saluted. She reported that they had captured several human weapon systems intact and studied them thoroughly. The technology was impressive for such a young species, but it was nothing the consortium had not seen before. Kinetic weapons, explosive missiles, some basic energy weapons. Nothing surprising, nothing dangerous. Zekrath nodded and dismissed the officer. He looked at the screens for a moment, then left the room. He had battles to plan and victories to win. The humans would surrender soon enough. They had to. The mathematics of war were not in their favor, but not everyone in the consortium was as confident as Zekrath. Sub-Commander Tilan was a member of a different species, the Kresh. The Kresh were smaller than the Vorthak, with blue-gray skin and large eyes adapted for seeing in low light. They were not warriors by nature. The Kresh were analysts, scientists, and intelligence officers. They saw patterns where others saw only chaos. Tilan worked in the intelligence division of the consortium fleet. Her job was to gather information about the enemy and find weaknesses. She spent her days reading reports, watching recordings of battles, and analyzing data. And something about the humans was bothering her. Something did not add up. She sat in her small office, surrounded by screens and data streams. She pulled up the files on human industrial capacity. The humans had dozens of large manufacturing facilities spread across their colonies and in orbit around Earth. These facilities were producing weapons, ships, and supplies at an impressive rate. But here was the strange thing. The production output was much higher than what the humans were actually using in battle. Tilan did the calculations several times to make sure. The humans were building far more weapons than they were deploying. Their factories were running at full capacity, creating massive stockpiles. But where were all those weapons going? Why were the humans not using them? It made no sense from a military perspective. When you were losing a war, you used everything you had. She dug deeper into the data. She found references in intercepted human communications that made her even more curious. Phrases like restricted protocols and sealed armories kept appearing in the messages. One communication she decrypted mentioned something called Project Sundial. Another referred to the Nova Strike Initiative. A third spoke of the Erebus Protocol. But she could find no details about what these projects actually were. Tilan spent days trying to learn more. She used every intelligence tool available to her. But the humans had excellent security around certain topics. Whatever these projects were, they were deeply classified. The humans were protecting these secrets even more carefully than they protected their military strategies. That alone was significant. Why would you guard research projects more heavily than battle plans? One evening, Talon found something interesting. She was reviewing data from a Vorthak raid on a human outpost when she noticed something odd. The human defenders had fought fiercely, but their base had extensive underground sections that appeared to be research laboratories. The Vorthak troops had not bothered to explore those sections thoroughly. They were more interested in taking prisoners and seizing ships, but Talon looked at the scans of those underground labs. The energy readings were enormous. Whatever research the humans had been doing there required massive amounts of power levels that suggested experiments with exotic physics, the kind of things that only the most advanced consortium species played with. Why would a primitive species like humanity be conducting such advanced research? Talon compiled all her findings into a report. She included the production discrepancies, the references to classified projects, and the evidence of advanced research facilities. She highlighted the fact that humanity was holding back somehow, not using their full industrial capacity in the war. Her conclusion was careful but clear. The consortium should not underestimate these humans. There was more to them than appeared on the surface. She sent the report to Commander Zekrath and requested a meeting. 2 days later, she stood in his office, a small Kresh officer facing a towering Vorthak commander. Zekrath sat behind a massive desk, reading her report on a datapad. His expression was skeptical. When he finished reading, he looked at Talon with barely concealed amusement. He told her that she was seeing shadows where none existed. The humans were desperate, he said. They were probably hoarding supplies in case of a long siege. The classified projects were most likely propaganda, fake programs designed to make the humans seem more dangerous than they were. As for the research facilities, the humans were probably just wasteful with energy. Young species often were, Talon tried to argue. She pointed out specific data points, showed him the calculations. But Zekrath waved her concerns away. He had been fighting wars for 40 years. He knew the difference between a real threat and a bluff. The humans were bluffing, trying to make themselves seem scarier than they were. It was a classic tactic of the weak. The commander stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. He told Talon to focus on finding actual tactical intelligence, things like fleet positions and supply routes. He said to stop wasting time on conspiracy theories. The war would be over in a few weeks anyway. The humans were on their last legs. Talon left the office feeling frustrated and worried. She had done her job and presented the evidence. If the commander chose to ignore it, that was his decision. But she could not shake the feeling that they were all missing something important. The humans were hiding something big, and eventually the consortium would discover what it was. She just hoped that discovery would not come as an unpleasant surprise. Meanwhile, the war continued its grim progression. More colonies fell to the consortium advance. More human ships were destroyed in desperate battles. The news media across human space showed footage of evacuations, of people leaving homes they had built with their own hands. There was anger in the human population and fear, but also determination. These aliens thought they could just take what belonged to humanity. They would learn otherwise. In the command center on Earth, President Okafor watched the tactical displays with General Martinez. The map of human space was covered with red markers showing consortium forces. Blue markers showing human defenses were fewer and more scattered. The general pointed out that the human fleet was being pushed back toward the core systems. In another month, maybe 2, the enemy would be at Earth itself. President Okafor asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Was it time to unseal the vaults? Was it time to show the consortium what humanity was really capable of? General Martinez shook his head. Not yet, he said. 3 months into the war, the situation looked desperate for humanity. The consortium controlled nearly half of human colonial space. Their fleets moved with confidence, no longer expecting serious resistance. The human military was still fighting, still making the aliens pay for every victory. But everyone could see the end approaching. Earth itself would soon be under threat. But Sub-Commander Talon could not stop thinking about the mysteries she had uncovered. Despite Commander Zekrath dismissing her concerns, she continued her research in whatever spare time she had. She was convinced that the humans were hiding something significant, and the more she looked, the more evidence she found. Late one night, Working alone in her office while most of the crew slept, Talon made a breakthrough. She had been analyzing human communication patterns, looking for anything unusual. Most military messages were encrypted too well for her to break, but sometimes mistakes were made. Sometimes a message was sent with weak encryption or transmitted through an insecure channel. She found one such message, a fragment of a conversation between two human officers. The message was incomplete, but what she could read was shocking. One officer was asking about authorization codes for something called the sundial systems. The other officer responded that those codes were locked under triple classification and would only be released by direct order from the president. The conversation ended with a comment that chilled Talon. One officer said he hoped they would never need to use sundial, because if they did, there would be no going back. Talon sat back in her chair, her large eyes wide. Whatever sundial was, it scared the humans themselves. They had weapons they were afraid to use, but why? What could be so terrible that even facing defeat they kept it locked away? She searched through every database she could access, looking for more information. She found references to other classified programs: Nova Strike, Erebus, Kronos, Singularity Zero. The names meant nothing to her, but they appeared again and again in fragments of data. Then she found something even more disturbing. She discovered records of human history, files that had been captured from a civilian data center. She spent hours reading about Earth's past, learning how humans had developed their technology. What she read horrified her. The humans had fought terrible wars among themselves, wars that killed millions. They had developed weapons of mass destruction centuries ago. Weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds, nuclear bombs, biological weapons, chemical agents that could kill in horrible ways, but that was not the worst part. The worst part was that humans had eventually stopped using these weapons because they scared themselves. They had come to the edge of destroying their own planet and pulled back. They had created international agreements to ban certain weapons, to lock them away and never use them again. The human species had looked into the abyss of their own destructive capability and chosen restraint. Talon realized something that made her blood run cold. If humans had banned weapons centuries ago because they were too terrible to use, and if they had continued developing technology since then, what other weapons had they created? What had they built during their expansion into space, during the development of faster-than-light travel and advanced physics? And more importantly, were those weapons sealed away just like the old ones? She updated her report with all the new information she had found. She included the intercepted communications, the historical data, and her analysis of what it all meant. Her conclusion was stark and urgent. The humans were not fighting with their full capabilities. They were deliberately holding back, possibly because they feared their own weapons. The consortium needed to be careful. Pushing humanity to desperation might cause them to unseal whatever terrible things they had locked away. Talon requested another meeting with Commander Zekrath. This time she insisted it was urgent. She stood in his office again, but this time she was more forceful. She presented her evidence piece by piece, showing him the patterns she had found. She explained about human history, about their tradition of banning weapons too dangerous to use. She begged him to consider that humanity might have weapons the consortium had never seen before. Zekrath listened this time, but his expression remained skeptical. When Talon finished, he stood and walked to the window of his office, looking out at the stars. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned back to her and spoke. He said that he understood her concerns, but they changed nothing. Even if the humans had secret weapons, what did it matter? The consortium had numbers and superior technology. Whatever the humans unleashed, the consortium could handle it. The commander explained his reasoning. The humans were young, barely a century into space exploration. The consortium species had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. They had seen every type of weapon imaginable. Energy beams, particle accelerators, antimatter bombs, gravitational weapons. The consortium had defenses against all of it. What could these primitive humans possibly have created that would threaten a civilization as advanced as the consortium? Talon tried one more time. She said that dismissing an unknown threat was dangerous. She quoted old military wisdom from her own species. The enemy you underestimate is the enemy who defeats you. But Zekrath shook his head. He thanked her for her diligence but told her to stop worrying. The consortium fleet was already preparing for the final assault. In 2 weeks, they would enter the Sol system and strike at Earth itself. The war would be over and humanity would surrender. End of story. Talon left the meeting feeling defeated and afraid. She had done everything she could to warn her superiors. They had chosen not to listen. All she could do now was watch and hope she was wrong. But deep in her heart, she knew she was not wrong. The humans were hiding something, and the consortium was about to find out what it was the hard way. On Earth, in the underground command center, President Okafor received the intelligence reports about consortium fleet movements. The enemy was massing their forces for a final push. They were bringing everything they had, hundreds of warships, enough firepower to overwhelm any defense. The attack on Earth was coming, and it was coming soon. She called an emergency meeting of the Defense Council. General Martinez was there, along with Admiral Chen via secure video link from her ship. The president looked at these tired, determined faces and asked the question they had all been dreading. Was it time? Was it finally time to remove all restrictions? General Martinez pulled up a display showing the sealed armories. These facilities existed on the moon, on several space stations, and in hidden locations throughout the solar system. Each one contained weapons that humanity had promised itself never to use again. Weapons that bent physics in terrible ways. Weapons that could unmake matter itself. Weapons that made nuclear bombs look like children's toys. The general explained that if they released these weapons, there was no going back. The galaxy would know what humanity was capable of. The consortium would be terrified, and that fear could lead to consequences no one could predict. But if they did not release these weapons, Earth would fall. Humanity would be conquered. The choice was that simple and that terrible. President Okafor looked at each member of the council. She saw the same conflict in their eyes that she felt in her heart. They had all hoped it would not come to this. They had hoped that conventional weapons would be enough. But hope was not a strategy, and they were out of time. She asked Admiral Chen for her professional opinion. The Admiral was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a steady voice. She said that she could hold the consortium at bay for maybe 2 more weeks with conventional forces. But when they made their final push on Earth, there would be no stopping them. Not with the weapons they were currently using. If Earth was to remain free, if humanity was to survive as an independent species, they needed every weapon at their disposal. President Okafor nodded slowly. She looked at the authorization codes displayed on the screen in front of her. These codes would unlock the sealed vaults. They would give humanity access to weapons that should never exist. She thought about her grandson again, about the future he would inherit, a future of slavery under alien rule, or a future where humanity stood free but feared by all who knew them. She made her decision. President Okafor entered the authorization codes and confirmed them with her biometric signature. The orders went out instantly to every sealed facility. All restrictions were lifted. All protocols were activated. The forbidden weapons were now available for use. Humanity had unleashed itself. General Martinez sent updated orders to all military commanders. They were no longer limited to conventional warfare. They could access the sealed armories and deploy any weapons necessary to defend humanity. The message was clear and simple. Protect Earth, protect humanity. Use everything. Admiral Chen received her orders while standing on the bridge of the Indomitable. She read the message twice to make sure she understood correctly. Then she called her senior officers together and told them what was about to happen. She said they had been fighting with one hand tied behind their backs. Now both hands were free. The consortium thought they were winning. They thought they knew what humanity was capable of. They were wrong. The consortium fleet entered the Sol system like a conquering army, confident and unstoppable. Hundreds of warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of human space. They formed into battle groups, their sensors sweeping the area for defenses. They expected to find human ships desperately trying to protect their homeworld. They expected a final futile stand. What they found instead was silence. Commander Zekrath stood on his bridge studying the tactical displays with confusion. Where were the human defenders? Long-range sensors showed a few human ships scattered around the system, but not nearly enough to mount a serious defense. Had the humans given up? Had they already evacuated their homeworld? No, that made no sense. Earth was their birthplace, their most precious world. They would never abandon it without a fight. The Vorthak fleet moved deeper into the solar system, heading toward Earth. They passed the orbit of Neptune, then Uranus. Still no significant resistance. A few human ships fired long-range missiles, but those were easily destroyed by consortium point defense systems. This was strange, very strange. Then as the fleet crossed the orbit of Jupiter, everything changed. Space itself seemed to shudder. The first Vorthak ships in the formation suddenly stopped moving. Their hulls began to twist and deform, as if invisible hands were pulling them apart. Alarms blared across the fleet as sensors detected gravitational anomalies where none should exist. The lead ships were being torn apart by artificial gravity wells, miniature black holes that appeared and disappeared in microseconds. These were gravitational disruptor mines, one of humanity's sealed weapons. They created focused warps in space-time that ripped ships apart at the quantum level. The consortium had theoretical knowledge of such weapons but had never seen them deployed. The energy requirements were enormous and the technology was considered too dangerous for practical use. But the humans had built them anyway, and now they were using them. Commander Zekrath ordered his fleet to scatter and change course. They adapted quickly, using their sensors to detect the gravitational distortions and avoid the mines. But that was only the beginning. As the consortium ships maneuvered, human vessels decloaked all around them. These were not the same ships the consortium had been fighting for months. These were different, sleeker, with weapon systems that did not match any known human designs. The human destroyers opened fire with weapons that seemed to violate basic physics. Beams of energy that did not just burn through ship hulls but converted the matter itself into plasma. Vorthak armor, which had withstood thousands of battles, simply ceased to exist where these beams touched it. The converted matter then exploded, turning ships into massive bombs that destroyed themselves from the inside out. Zekrath watched in horror as a quarter of his fleet was destroyed in the first 5 minutes. He shouted orders, demanding his weapons officers return fire. The consortium ships responded with their energy cannons and missiles, but the human vessels were too fast. They moved in ways that should not be possible, making turns that would crush any crew under impossible G-forces. It was as if the human ships ignored inertia itself. Then the human stealth carriers revealed themselves. These massive ships had been hiding in the system for weeks, waiting in perfect silence. When they activated, they launched swarms of small craft. But these were not ordinary fighters. They were clouds of nanomachines, billions of microscopic robots that flowed through space like liquid metal. The nanite swarm surrounded consortium ships and began to disassemble them, pulling apart hull plating atom by atom. A Vorthak cruiser near Zekrath's flagship was enveloped by one of these swarms. The crew broadcast their panic as they watched their ship being eaten away from the outside in. The hull disappeared, then the internal structures, then the crew compartments themselves. In less than 2 minutes, a ship that had taken years to build was reduced to its component atoms, floating in space as an expanding cloud of dust. The consortium fleet tried to fight back with everything they had. They used their most powerful weapons, their best tactics, but nothing worked. The human ships seemed to anticipate every move. When Vorthak battleships tried to concentrate their fire, human vessels deployed shields that bent space itself, redirecting the energy around them. When consortium fighters attempted to engage in close combat, they found themselves caught in chronology disruption fields that aged their ships centuries and seconds. Metal corroded and systems failed as if thousands of years had passed in moments. Admiral Chen sat in her command chair on the Indomitable, watching the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. This was not the war she had wanted to fight. These weapons terrified her. But the consortium had given humanity no choice. They had come to conquer Earth, and now they would learn why that was a mistake. She gave quiet orders to her fleet, coordinating the attack with precision and efficiency. A consortium command ship made the fatal mistake of trying to target Earth itself. It launched a salvo of planet-killer missiles, weapons designed to penetrate deep into a world's crust and trigger catastrophic earthquakes. The missiles never reached their target. A human defense platform activated something called a causality warhead. It was a weapon that rewrote cause and effect in a localized area. The missiles simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but erased from reality as if they had never been built. Commander Zekrath's flagship shook as a human weapon hit its shields. The shields held, but readings showed they would not survive another hit. Zekrath demanded a status report. His tactical officer responded with trembling voice. Half the fleet was gone. Half. In less than an hour, the mighty consortium armada had been reduced to scattered, desperate groups trying to survive. Then a human frigate approached Zekrath's flagship directly. It was a small ship, barely a tenth the size of the massive Vorthak battleship. It fired a single weapon, something the sensors could not even classify. The weapon hit the flagship's shields and passed right through them as if they were not there. The ship's systems began to fail one by one. Power fluctuated. Life support stuttered. The weapon had not destroyed the ship, but disrupted it at a fundamental level, attacking the very bonds that held matter together. Zekrath realized with crushing certainty that he was going to die. His mighty flagship, the pride of the Vorthak military, was being taken apart by a weapon he did not understand from a species he had dismissed as primitive. He looked around his bridge at his crew, seeing the same realization in their eyes. They had failed. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the ultimate price. But then, unexpectedly, the human attacks stopped. The disruptive weapon shut off. The flagship's systems began to stabilize. Across the battlefield, human ships ceased fire and fell back to defensive positions. The surviving consortium vessels floated in space, damaged and confused. Why had the humans stopped? They had the consortium fleet beaten. They could have destroyed everyone. Why show mercy now? Admiral Chen opened a communication channel that went to every consortium ship simultaneously. Her face appeared on screens across the fleet. She looked tired but determined. She spoke in a calm voice that somehow carried more weight than any shout. She said that the killing would stop now. The consortium had come to conquer Earth and they had failed. Humanity had shown only a fraction of their capabilities, and it had been enough to destroy half the attacking fleet in less than 2 hours. The Admiral explained that humanity did not want to destroy the consortium. They did not want to be conquerors or killers. They had only ever wanted to be left alone, to build their colonies in peace. But the consortium had not allowed that. They had come with demands and then with weapons, and now they had learned a hard lesson. Admiral Chen said that the surviving consortium ships would be allowed to leave the Sol system. They would be allowed to return to their space and carry a message to their leaders. The message was simple. Humanity was more than they appeared. The weapons the consortium had fought for 3 months were training tools, peacetime armaments. The weapons they had just seen were the real military arsenal. The technologies humanity had kept sealed away because they understood how dangerous they were. But even these weapons, the Admiral said, were not everything. There were things sealed even deeper, weapons that humanity prayed they would never have to use, weapons that could unravel reality itself, that could make stars die, that could threaten the fabric of space-time. Humanity had looked into the darkness of their own capabilities and chosen restraint. They had fought the consortium with restraint. But if pushed too far, if threatened with extinction, they would use everything, and no one wanted to see that day. The communication ended. The human fleet maintained their positions, weapons ready but not firing. Across the consortium fleet, commanders looked at each other and knew they had no choice. They had come as conquerors and been crushed. If they continued fighting, none would survive. Slowly, the orders went out. The consortium fleet would retreat. They would leave the Sol system and return home to tell their leaders what had happened. Commander Zekrath sat in his damaged command chair, staring at the tactical display. The display showed human ships surrounding his fleet, weapons that could destroy them all in minutes. News of the battle at Earth spread across the galaxy like a shockwave. The consortium fleet that had retreated brought back stories that seemed impossible. Stories of human ships that moved through space in ways that defied physics. Stories of weapons that unmade matter itself. Stories of entire battleships being aged to dust in seconds. Most disturbing of all were the stories of restraint. The humans had stopped fighting when they could have destroyed the entire consortium fleet. They had shown mercy, and that mercy was somehow more frightening than any weapon. An emergency meeting of the Galactic Council was called. Representatives from all 47 member species gathered at the Council Station, a massive structure that had floated in neutral space for thousands of years. This was where galactic law was made, where disputes were settled, where the fate of civilizations was decided, and today, they would discuss what to do about humanity. The council chamber was circular with seats arranged in rising tiers so that all could see each other. At the center stood a platform where speakers could address the assembly. The chamber was full for the first time in decades. Everyone wanted to hear what had happened. Everyone wanted to understand how the mighty Vorthak fleet had been crushed by a species barely a century old. Sub-Commander Talon was called to testify. She stood at the center platform, a small Kresh intelligence officer facing the collective leadership of galactic civilization. She told them everything she had discovered during her research. She showed them the intercepted communications, the references to classified projects, the evidence of sealed weapons facilities. She explained that she had tried to warn Commander Zekrath, but her warnings had been dismissed. Then she told them something that made the entire chamber fall silent. She had continued her research after the battle, digging deeper into human history and culture. What she found changed everything. The humans had not developed their terrible weapons recently. They had built most of them centuries ago during their own internal wars. Wars where millions died. Wars that nearly destroyed their entire civilization. Talon explained that at one point in their history, humans had come very close to making their planet uninhabitable. They had weapons that could poison the atmosphere, bombs that could trigger nuclear winter, biological agents that could kill every living thing, and they had come within moments of using them. Multiple times, the human species had looked into the abyss of self-destruction and barely stepped back from the edge. But here was the remarkable part. After realizing how close they had come to extinction, humans had changed. They had created international agreements to ban certain weapons. They had sealed away the most dangerous technologies. They had made laws that said some things were too terrible to use even in war, and they had kept those laws for hundreds of years. When humans reached the stars and developed even more advanced technologies, they did the same thing. Every time they created something too dangerous, they locked it away. They built the weapons because they knew they might need them for survival. But they sealed them because they understood the responsibility that came with such power. The weapons used against the consortium fleet were not even the worst things humanity had created. They were just the ones humans were willing to use. Talon finished her testimony by saying something that shook every being in that chamber. She said that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons, but their fear of those weapons. They understood the horror they were capable of, and that understanding made them more dangerous than any species that used violence carelessly. The humans had shown the consortium mercy, not because they were weak, but because they knew exactly what mercy meant when you had the power to destroy everything. After Talon stepped down, the council chamber erupted in debate. Some species argued that humanity was too dangerous to be left alone. They said that any civilization with such weapons should be monitored, controlled, or even destroyed before they could threaten the galaxy. Others argued the opposite. They said that humanity's restraint proved they could be trusted. The debate went on for hours with no clear consensus. Finally, a Vorthak representative stood to speak. It was not Commander Zekrath. He had been removed from command in disgrace after the failed invasion. Instead, it was High Commander Torval, one of the most respected military leaders in consortium history. She was old with scars from 100 battles. When she spoke, everyone listened. Torval said that she had reviewed all the evidence, spoken with survivors, and studied the battle recordings. What she had learned humbled her. The Vorthak had attacked humanity because they seemed weak. They had judged them by their most basic weapons and assumed that was all they had. It was the oldest mistake in warfare. Never judge an enemy by what they show you in peacetime. Judge them by what they are capable of when survival is at stake. The High Commander continued. She said that humanity had fought the war with training weapons. The railguns and missiles they used at first were the equivalent of what the Vorthak used for military exercises. The real human military had stayed hidden, waiting. When the consortium fleet attacked Earth itself, humanity had finally shown their true capabilities. And even then they had held back. Even in the face of an invasion of their homeworld, they had not used their most terrible weapons. Torval made a recommendation that shocked the entire council. She said the Vorthak military formally apologized to humanity for the unprovoked invasion. She said the consortium should immediately offer humanity full membership with all rights and privileges, not as a defeated enemy or a conquered species, but as equals, because humanity had proven something that no other species in galactic history had shown. They had the power to destroy, but the wisdom to restrain, and that combination was more valuable than any weapon. The council voted. It took 3 days of debate, negotiation, and compromise. But in the end, the decision was made. Humanity would be offered full membership in the Galactic Consortium. All claims on human territory would be dropped. Reparations would be paid for the colonies that had been damaged or occupied. And humanity would be given a permanent seat on the Council, with equal voice in galactic affairs. The news reached Earth a week later. President Okafor stood in front of cameras and addressed not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. She said that humanity accepted the Council's offer. They would join the galactic community as partners and allies. But she also made something very clear. The weapons humanity had used in the war would be sealed away again. They would go back into the vaults, locked behind security protocols, forbidden except in the most extreme circumstances. President Okafor explained humanity's philosophy in simple terms. They believed that the most powerful weapons should be the least used, that having the ability to destroy was not the same as having the right to destroy, that true strength came not from using every weapon you possessed, but from knowing when not to use them. Humanity had learned these lessons the hard way, through centuries of war and near extinction. They hoped the galaxy could learn them without paying such a terrible price. 6 months after the battle, Admiral Chen stood in a small ceremony on the lunar surface. She was there with General Martinez, President Okafor, and a handful of others who knew the full truth about humanity's capabilities. They stood outside a massive vault built deep into the moon's crust. This was one of the sealed facilities, one of the places where humanity kept its darkest secrets. Also present at the ceremony was Talon. She had been assigned as the consortium's permanent liaison to humanity, a role she had accepted with mixed feelings. She respected humans now, understood them better than most of her own people, but she was also deeply afraid of them. Not because they were violent, but because they were so good at violence when they chose to be. Admiral Chen had invited Talon to this ceremony specifically. She said it was important that someone from the consortium understand exactly what humanity was capable of. They walked together through the vault, past sealed chambers containing the weapons that had defeated the Vorthak fleet. Gravitational disruptors, matter conversion systems, chronology weapons. Talon looked at these terrible devices with wide eyes, hardly believing they existed, but then they went deeper, past more security doors, past defenses that could kill anyone who did not have proper authorization. They reached a final chamber, sealed with locks that required the simultaneous authorization of the president, the head of the military, and the leaders of both houses of the human government. Admiral Chen showed Talon the control panel that opened this chamber. She did not open it, but she explained what was inside. Behind that final door were weapons that could threaten reality itself. Starkiller devices that could trigger supernovas in any sun. Reality-unraveling systems that could tear holes in the fabric of space-time. Weapons that existed in higher dimensions that could strike targets in the past or future. Technologies that could end not just civilizations but entire star clusters. Things that should never have been invented, could never be uninvented, and must never be used. Admiral Chen told Talon that these weapons had names. Project Sundial, Nova Strike, the Erebus Protocol, Singularity Zero, Kronos.